Welcome to the Stream of Art podcast. Join me, Robyn.
And me, Michelle, as we chat openly about personal growth, creativity, and building a career in the arts. All right. So how are you doing this week, Robyn?
I'm pretty good. I had my last day of work yesterday before my holiday break. So
Woohoo.
It's going to take me a little bit of time to properly unwind, but I'm looking forward to a little bit of R&R. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. It was a pretty busy week, just kind of getting some stuff wrapped up. I had some things I was practicing for guitar that I was kind of coming to the end of, a couple of courses I was working through. Didn't finish the courses all the way, but I finished just a couple of portions of a couple of the courses. So I feel like I'm ready to have, a couple of weeks off from practicing. I'm still going to be writing music and I still want to spend some time playing guitar, but I don't have any specific practice plan in mind. So I feel like I'm going to be able to just have a little bit of breathing room, a little bit more room for play. So yeah, I think it'll be good. But otherwise it's pretty uneventful. I think that's always the case this time of year. It's kind of like, a lot of the weeks kind of blend together as you're just kind of getting things wrapped up.
Yeah, winding down. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And you're like super excited about tomorrow because you get to come over and eat food that I'm making for you, right?
I am so unbelievably excited. Yeah, when was the last time we saw each other in person? I think it was Thanksgiving.
I don't even I don't remember.
I think
so. I guess
yeah,
so.
because I went over to your place for Thanksgiving and we played.
Did you?
Yeah.
I don't even remember that.
I think you had an art show that weekend. So maybe you were just so tired.
Right.
You don't remember.
Okay, now it's coming back to me. Yeah, I was probably out of it.
Yeah, because I think I got there, you were still out. So I just hung out with Mike, and then
That's right.
You came back and talked about it.
Yes, now I remember. Yes. That feels like a long time ago, but also not a long time ago. You know how time does that? It's really strange.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been feeling like that a lot these days. Or like, I can't believe it's been this long, but also it doesn't feel like that long.
So this week, we wanted to talk about reviewing and reflecting on the past year, which is, we're heading into the new year, so it's the perfect time to do this. So I did a little bit. I sat down, did a little bit of like reviewing on my year. And I realized I didn't actually really come up with an annual plan last year. So I thought this would be like a bigger process for me. And I was like, I guess I should establish a process for this because I'm super curious to know what you do, because I had like some questions that I like answered as part of my annual review, but it is not very thorough or in depth. And I'm like, I should set something up better for this year. So I'm super curious to pick your brain.
Well, so it's interesting. This might surprise you, but I don't have a yearly review plan currently in place, I have a little bit of a sort of ritual I do each year to kind of look at the year ahead, but I actually realized just in this exercise of getting ready for this podcast episode, I'm woefully ill prepared to do a proper review. So that's something that's really made me interested in developing like a better ritual. And I think I was partly really inspired by you talking about some of the reviews that you do, some of the checklists and things like that. It's something I've been feeling for a while like I want to get better at. And I did start exploring doing weekly reviews this year, and I did a little bit of that, but I want to really establish a better review system on a yearly level, on a quarterly level, and then on a weekly level. So as I was getting ready to do some review, I was thinking in terms also of like, how can I set up sort of a proper review that happens every year to kind of cover all the bases that need to be covered. So I'm very much flying by the seat of my pants right now. I'm just kind of winging it. And, through that process, I know I'll be able to come up with something that helps me really look back on my year. But I think maybe some of that's a product of just being somebody who spends so much time looking ahead. Yeah. I'm always thinking about the plans that I have going forward and the things I want to do, that I do often neglect looking back, either to reflect on what I still need to improve, or even just to celebrate how far I've come. I don't think I give myself enough credit for how much I've improved in various areas of my life over the last several years. So, what I was really finding helpful about, specifically in this case, I was reviewing my journals from this past year. It really just gave me a chance to appreciate how much I've improved and how much I actually did this year. And also to see what issues are still coming up that maybe need to be made a priority for the next year. So, and it's interesting because I actually wrote a blog post about taking the time to review and reflect last year for the new year. But I have actually done a pretty poor job of doing that myself. I did that, just to some degree, certainly as far as my music goes, that I'm much more in tune with. And, I'll do at least some sort of looking back, but this, where I'm actually writing things down and really looking at patterns and really looking to see where I'm still falling short, that is pretty new.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I wonder if that's pretty common, like I'm thinking like it was the same with me, right? Where it's like, I'll come up with kind of like annual plans, not really, I'm like very, very bare bones annual objectives, but I don't really look back. And I wonder how common that is for people who are in this process of like creating a plan for themselves for 2024. How many of us actually sit down and give ourselves a pat on the back for what we have done the year before. It's kind of sad, where it's just this kind of like constant forward motion. It's exhausting. Mm-hmm. We should take some time to just really think back and focus on those like little, even just like the little accomplishments that we've managed to do. Yeah, so ideally, like I'm thinking, because I was trying to think, okay, so what would an annual review even look like? Like what would serve a good purpose? I guess that kind of comes down to, what do you want the goal to be of this? And I'm thinking, for me, like what I do is I do monthly reviews, where I look back. There's some questions that I like. What went well? Where do I need to invest more time? What were some things that I like? What were some monthly wins? And I do that. And I wonder if maybe, because I'm doing that on a monthly basis, maybe for an annual review, maybe the focus should be more on like, this is your time to sit down and give yourself a pat on the back. So less about the metrics and more about just like giving yourself kind of a hug.
Yeah, I like that idea. And again, I really admire the fact that you have an ongoing review system.
It's a new thing. Like I just started it last spring, maybe.
Okay.
And it's nice. I actually I've kind of fallen off the wagon because just like I haven't been doing as good of a job of tracking, but I was doing a really good job of actually tracking my hours and like how many of my hours is spent on painting versus like working on the website or doing planning or whatever, right? So I have like these different kind of time buckets and I track that. So I'll kind of calculate at the end of the month how many hours, like where I invested my time, which is kind of helpful because it puts into perspective in terms of like how much time is spent creating versus all of the other things that happen around creating. And of course, over the past couple of months, I haven't been doing much of anything. So I don't think I've done a monthly review since October, maybe, because there hasn't really been much going on.
Yeah, I love that idea of tracking the hours you spend doing various activities. I kind of already do that for my music stuff. So I have this journal I keep where I track different metrics. This is like a daily journal. So I have meditation as one metric, I have reading, and I have movement. And those are just boxes. So I check them off if I did them.
Right.
And then I have 3 that I actually write something specific. So I have listening, where I write down whatever music I listened to that day. Because I, over the last couple of years, have really tried to cultivate a daily listening practice to where I listen to, usually a specific album. Sometimes if there's a song I'm obsessed with, I'll just listen to that on repeat and just write that down. But I like to track exactly what I've been listening to, just because I like to also look back and just see, what I listened to over the last year. I also track the number of hours I spend working on music stuff each day. And then I track the number of deep work hours that I do each day, which deep work is a reference for anybody who doesn't know to a book by Cal Newport, which is excellent. I highly recommend it. And that's actually a big part of what started me on this sort of journey over the last almost 2 years. I read Deep Work sort of halfway through February. I started reading it halfway through February 2022, and it's just taken me on this incredible journey. So shout out to Cal Newport and Deep Work. But yeah, I started tracking my deep work hours. So that generally will include what I did musically, but it also includes any teaching I do, any writing I do, basically anything where I've really shut everything else out and I'm just doing really intense focused work. So I love the idea of tallying all of that at the end of a month. I actually was toying with the idea of doing something like that with my music, but I might actually track all my metrics that way just to see like what I did, how consistent I was with all the different parts to see what maybe needs to be adjusted.
Yeah. I must admit that I track this stuff, but I don't really use the data in any way. But at some point I imagine I'll kind of, it will serve a purpose. Cause for now it's like, I spend the time I need to spend on things.
Right.
And because I have limited hours in the day too, and this isn't my primary focus, I'm a bit more willy-nilly with where I decide to, I don't need to be super strategic, in other words, because I'm not relying on this work to put food on my plate. But it is, I think it's an interesting practice to get into, and might as well establish, in my mind, I might as well establish these habits now before they're necessary, because that'll become, right? Otherwise it's going to be, if this grows and now I'm in the thick of it and things are really busy, it's going to be much harder to establish these very detail-oriented practices, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's really smart to get out ahead of it, to sort of anticipate, things can get crazy going forward. Better start now. Yeah.
The other thing that I have kind of built in, because I have a monthly review template on Notion, and at the end, so I have my prompt questions, and I have a little area to fill in the hours, and then at the end there's a checklist of all the other things I need to do, which is helpful because it directs, because I have other, if I'm doing online courses, for instance, I have an area where I take notes, and as I'm taking notes, I have a little box for action items. And so one of my monthly review things is to go through any notes to look for action items that you can actually action now, because otherwise what happens is I take notes on things, I make little action points or whatever, and then they kind of just float off. I completely forget that they exist, right? So I have these mechanisms in place for each monthly review to kind of remind me, oh, don't forget to look through this stuff, and don't forget to look here, and don't forget to do this. And so it helps me make sure that I'm using everything that I'm sort of creating or taking note of or whatever, right? It's making sure that things don't fall through the cracks. So it's been the monthly review has been a really, really helpful. And yeah, so for the annual review, trying to think of thinking along the lines of what's going to, in terms of an annual review, what's going to serve me. I haven't quite figured that out yet. And it was a strange experience to be going through the annual review, because I'm not in a super positive headspace with my art and that whole area of my life. So to be doing kind of an annual review, I'm what have I accomplished? Really,
Right.
So it was this is not the right time really to be even engaging in this activity, because I'm just kind of a little bit negative.
Right. I kind of love the idea of doing it now in that headspace, because when we do one again next year, it'll be really fun to see how far you and I have come. So you coming from this place of sort of being more on your game in terms of just reviewing in general, but being in more of like a negative headspace. Whereas I'm very much just now really getting my reviewing act together, but I feel much more positive about where I'm at and where I'm going.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see if we can kind of like both increase in the areas where we're sort of at a deficit.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because like in my mind, you know, you're saying that you're not on top of like the reviewing stuff yet, but like you're doing. Whereas with me, and I'm really bad for this, I'm really good at just like procrastinating on the actual doing by working on crap like this.
I've had to work on that.
So it's kind of like I feel a certain level of shame, I guess, like when you're like, oh, you have like good practices in place for that. It's like, yeah, but I'm not actually doing much art or anything. So, I mean, the amount of time I've spent on Notion just playing around with like getting organized, you know, if I had taken those hours and actually spent time like painting or marketing my work, I'd probably be further ahead than I am. But it's kind of like another hobby, like that getting my brain organized is like a whole other hobby that I love to dig into on occasion.
Yeah, I love that you and I share that. We're both Notion nerds and we love to talk about organization and planning. It is definitely a hobby. But something just came up as you were talking, because you're sort of asking yourself, what would be the purpose of a yearly review? And for you, it might be, what could I do differently to help myself take action? Oh. So, I mean, you already have that with your, you know, where you're deliberately going through and getting action items. But maybe there are some sort of larger trends you might start to recognize when you're evaluating over the course of the previous year that maybe you're not noticing on a month-to-month basis that might help sort of tip the scales for you so that you can actually, you know, be more consistently taking action. Because it might be something as simple as, you know, just needing to get more sleep. That was one of the things that came up for me when I was reading over my journal entries from this past year. Sleep is a big issue for me. And so that's something that now, thinking ahead to 2024, I'm going to make more of a priority to really get, you know, into a better place. You know, I was fortunately able to get to a point where my morning routine is like on point. So now I get up at 5 a.m. and I have like a very like a series of things I do before I start working on music each day. And I mean, that just got established, you know, starting in August. So it took me a lot of complaining in my journal about how I needed to get up earlier and do better things in the morning. But I eventually got there. But it's my nights that I'm realizing I really need to get under control, because I'm getting up early, but I'm not always going to bed as early as I need to. And so for me, that's one thing that I think is hindering some of my progress in other areas, because as we all know, when we're tired, we just aren't performing at our best. And in some cases, we just aren't performing at all. So that might be an example of something, as you reflect on the year, you might realize, oh, if I can really make a big sweeping change with this one area, it's going to mean I am more likely to take action consistently going forward in the next year.
I really like that. So as you were talking, I was taking some notes because I had some like little light bulb moments. But because I'm thinking, so first of all, what you're saying kind of, it reminds me of like what my therapist has said. You know, like when you're like, what can you do to make something 1% easier on yourself, right? So like if you're wanting to get into the habit of like exercising in the morning or doing morning yoga, like what's something you can do to make that 1% easier? And it's like, well, lay out your yoga mat the night before. It's just something, one less thing you have to do when you get up in the morning. And it's that reminder you're going to do this thing, right? And that commitment. So that kind of fits in with like kind of what you're saying, like look at like what can you do to make life easier for you to accomplish these things. And the other thing, because I was looking back on like what were my goals, and I don't really do any kind of lofty goals. Like I'm not super granular with it, but I had kind of like a sales target I wanted to hit, and I had a certain number of shows that I wanted to participate in. And I didn't hit the sales target, but I did hit the target number of shows, which is great.
Okay. But
it's kind of looking at like, okay, so you set those goals. What was the purpose of those goals? It's like, well, obviously the sales target was because I want money. And And the shows, like that, I wanted to do that many of shows because I thought it would help me get to my sales goal. And so then you're looking at that goal and it's like, did it serve you? And it didn't actually. So I set that goal on the assumption that every show I do, I'm going to make a certain amount of money, which is not how it panned out. So that might be the purpose for the annual review too, is like, okay, looking at the goals, did it serve the purpose that you wanted it to serve? If it didn't, like, how do you need to adjust it? Or what do you need to add in? So yeah, so I kind of, like, I was thinking that this morning, realizing I want to continue participating in shows, but I don't think I need to worry about like cramming in as many as I did this year, because it's not actually going to get me, it's not a make or break. I need to be doing it because it gets my work out there and it helps me meet other artists and like it does grow my audience, but there's something I need to work in beyond that to really help me achieve the sort of sales that I want to achieve. And I think, unfortunately, as much as I try to avoid it, I think social media marketing is going to be the thing that I have to kind of add in some capacity. And then maybe actually getting my website set up so that people can buy from me online would be helpful.
Yeah.
So that might just be like the time to really, like, the no nonsense, I've got to look at this and just face the hard truths. And social media marketing is going to be something that we touch on a lot, I bet, because I have such a resistance to it. And I'm still determined to find a way to grow this without relying on Instagram. Like I'm so determined. But if I'm determined, then I've got to actually be serious about trying to figure out another path then. Like, it's not enough to just sit back and be like, I refuse to be on social media. Like, I refuse to like market on social media and then just hope that things will fall into place for you. It's like, that's not good enough. You've got to find another way then. So if it's your newsletter, then you've got to find a way to promote your newsletter to get more subscribers. Like, it's just, so that might be, and I'll spend some more time because I will want to do an annual review or annual plan. So I'll spend some more time sort of reviewing and thinking more on these things. But I think for me, the annual plan will be a mix of, okay, let's give myself a pat on the back for the things I have done. Like the fact that I have done as many shows that I've done and that I'm really taking steps to care for my mental health. Like that's a big thing that wasn't part of my plan, but is really crucial and hard to do. Right. So like, you give yourself those warm and fuzzies and then it's like, okay, let's get real now. Let's give a hard look. What can we cut? What do we need to build in? And how can I do better with the resources that I have and with the person that I am right now?
Right. Yeah, that really ties into something we talked about a couple episodes ago about not making plans for a person you're not. Or for a life you're not living. I think that is so important. I love that idea of really making sure you're taking the time to pat yourself on the back for what you accomplished, because it is so easy to see where you're still lacking and for that to be the main focus. And yes, of course, there are areas we want to improve on, and I think that is important. But I think it's important to acknowledge your improvement because it kind of demonstrates to yourself your efficacy. You can say, well, these are things I was struggling with that now feel quite easy or easier. And if you can acknowledge that, it'll help bolster you to deal with the stuff that's still not working. So yeah, dealing with something uncomfortable like having to navigate getting your work out there, finding different ways of engaging with people, developing an online presence, all that stuff that is going to require commitment and, doing things that are, uncomfortable, that maybe put you out of your comfort zone, to be able to look back and say, well, I've done it for other things, will just help you move forward, I think, with more confidence. Even if something you try out doesn't work, you'll be able to say, I improved in all these areas. In my case, some of these things took me years to get to a point where I figured it out, but it was just because I kept trying things. Yeah. And so to be able to say, I know I'll get there eventually because I recognize my capacity for improvement, I think that can go a really long way.
Well, I think it's really important because I think more often than not, and I could be wrong, but for me anyways, I'm always falling short of my goals. And
Right.
I think a lot of that is because I don't set realistic goals. And I feel like that's fairly common. But I think it's critical that even if you don't reach those goals, like it's critical to not beat yourself up. Because let's be honest, every time we go on Instagram and we see people accomplishing the things we want to accomplish, like there's parts of our brain that are like, why can't you be like that? Why can't you do those things? And so it's so important for us to like, you know, you recognize, okay, I fell short, but don't necessarily blame yourself. It's okay. Like that happens. It's life. You're learning. Just keep going. But take some time right now to look at what you did do. And so like an example for me, like I said, like taking care of my mental health wasn't something that was a goal, but it's something that I started doing. And so, yeah, I didn't reach other goals, but then I was working on this thing, and that's really important too, right? So like really taking a look at those things that like, don't just look at the things you haven't accomplished. Look at those things that you have accomplished that you didn't even plan on accomplishing.
Yeah.
Because there will be things
really great
there,
point.
right? Like, yeah, I mean, another example is I didn't plan last year to start making like printing cards. Like I wasn't thinking of mass producing anything. And I did that this year. That's something that and it was something that was a little bit stressful for whatever reason. Because it's like, there's that like, well, who do I, like, what's a good printer? And, you know, like there's all these little questions that come in. But I did that thing. That was an accomplishment that wasn't really on my radar last January. So yeah, I think we're way too hard on ourselves. And you know, when they say if you're giving kind of constructive criticism, you need to always kind of like, here's what you're doing really well. Here's where you can improve. But like with us, we're just like, here's how I'm terrible, and this is what I need to do.
Here's why I'm a bad person.
Yeah. Like we don't treat ourselves nicely.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I really like the idea of adding some context to goals you don't reach. And so not immediately looking at a goal you haven't met and going, well, look at how I failed, but going, okay, well, look at everything else that I worked on. And something like working on your mental health is massive because of the impact it has just on your well-being,
right?
And just to exist as a human being. And that inevitably is going to have long-term positive effects on your art. So it's about thinking again in terms of zooming out and looking at sort of the broader perspective of your life. And you can even think about this year as like a longer season of mental health improvement, which again, massive. And when you zoom out over the course of your life, you can go, well, that taking that year to myself to really improve led me to being able to do a podcast every week, to taking more chances the next year. So, you know, it's acknowledging that where you are is completely fine and is probably going to eventually lead you to what you want to do.
Yeah.
And not feeling guilty about it. You know, and thinking too in terms of the context of, you know, what goals are you making? I think that was a really good point you brought up about making goals that are like achievable, because something like reaching a particular like financial goal, I think that's a really common one for entrepreneurs. But there's I think for a lot of people they find it helpful. But I think it's important to remember that it is something that is in a lot of ways outside of your control. And maybe setting certain financial goals is just something that is never going to be satisfying, and you might always feel like you fall short. And maybe it could be, and I'm thinking about this more for myself too, maybe in terms of financial goals, it's more a feeling. Maybe you get to the end of the year and you feel just more secure. You feel maybe you've established an additional stream of income, and regardless of how much that brings in, just the fact that you have more than, you know, just one or two or whatever, that helps you to feel a certain level of security that you didn't before. I think for me, financially, that's a big thing, is that I just want to feel more secure, because I definitely have a lot of financial fragility, and I feel very insecure from where I'm at right now. So I think more than any particular financial goal I might set for next year, it'll be more like a sense of just wanting to feel like I'm not constantly worried about being able to pay my bills. Like, that would be huge for me.
Yeah. Okay, I'm having so many thoughts right now. But you're right. Like that financial goal, I think the trick is like, why are you setting this goal? And I think for me, like I was setting that financial goal because it was like the thing to do. Like that's what people do. But
Right.
there's no point in setting a goal if like it's great to set a financial goal if you have sort of business actions in place to really push your product out there. But if you're kind of doing what I'm doing, where I'm just sort of flying by the seat of my pants and seeing how things go and I'm testing and stuff like that, right? The financial goal doesn't really make sense because I'm not in that place where I'm like, okay, I'm going to have an annual financial goal really is a bit useless because you've got to break that down monthly. And then, then you have to be tracking it. And if you're falling short one month, you've got to come up with a plan to make that up next month, right? And I'm not operating on that level yet. So it is sort of a silly metric for success at the stage I'm at right now. So I like that idea of like, let's just get that out of my head for now. Because it's not like I'm doing anything with it. I just kind of set it and then I just kind of left it and hoped for the best. And there's no, if you're going to set a goal, there has to be, you have to work with it, I think. You can't just sit it there and park it and then just like reassess in a year from now to see if you met it or not. You have to engage with it. And then like talking about, there's something you were mentioning and it reminded me of our conversation last week about being comfortable on your path, right? So you're not reaching those goals, but having trust in yourself that you are on the right path, you will be moving forward. It's just might be slower than what you anticipated, but you will keep moving forward and just like feeling confident and standing strong on the path that you're on. And then the other thing I was thinking of too with these reviews, I think another thing that's really, really critical is when you're reviewing your progress, approaching it from a state of curiosity versus judgment is...
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, I think you can achieve a lot more when you're curious about like, oh, okay, so that I didn't hit that. Like, why didn't I? Like, what stopped me? And does it really matter? Like, do I care that much? Is it that important? And asking those sorts of questions, I think can help you gain a lot of clarity in a way where you're being gentle on yourself because you're not like, it's not like a, oh, why didn't I? It's a, oh, why didn't I? There's a different tone there.
Yeah, 1,000%. Yeah, I think curiosity is one of my favorite words and my favorite, things to embody because it does invite that lightness, and it's without necessarily making excuses for yourself. It's more like you want to make things better, but without tearing yourself down or being like, well, you failed again or whatever. There is that sense of, okay, well, let's investigate what's going on here and let's start, maybe experimenting with some things. And yeah, I think that's such a great point to ask, like, does this actually really matter to me? And I think that's been an essential part of my journey in getting to where I am feeling like I'm on the right path is that I started asking those questions and I go, well, does this really matter to me? And sometimes the answer was yes. And I go, okay, well, now I know that this is something that matters. And so I'm going to actively work on trying some things to make it better. And sometimes the answer was no. And then I could let those things go.
Yeah. It's this is the phase, like this is something I'm working through just in life generally, is trying to untangle what I want from the shoulds, because we're surrounded by like, we should do this thing. Like if we want to have an art business, these are the things you should be doing. And I think our goals, or my goals, often reflect those external kind of messages. And so I'm and my life generally, like so I'm taking some time, or will be in sort of January, to really untangle that and try to figure out like, what do I want? Me, not based on what everyone else is doing, but based on what I want from life. And that is a really hard thing to figure out, especially in a world that is as connected as ours is right now. Because we see the lives that other people are living, and I think it's so easy to think that that's what we want, and to trick ourselves. And it's funny because we think of like annual planning and goal setting as such a straightforward thing, but it's so not. Like, to do it well is a real talent and skill that I don't have yet, but I'm determined to work on it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I think potentially the key to a great review would be to have it be something that encompasses your whole life and your whole being, so that it's not just about let's set goals and then try to reach them. I think if we're starting from a place of who am I and what do I want, then you can set goals that are much more informed by what you actually want to accomplish. Because we do have kind of the expected New Year's resolutions, right? It's generally like to lose a bunch of weight, to like maybe start a business, to like blah, blah, blah. It's like all these sort of like consistent things, to eat better, to read more, to like do these things. But
guilty. Those you named all the things that are like, I'm going to try to actively fight that instinct to be like, new year, new me.
Oh, God. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I'm in January going to be doing a New Year, New You challenge.
Right.
I did it last year. It was very, very helpful. So it is. And that's, I think, the tricky thing about the New Year is that there is this sense of opportunity to do things differently. I think it's like, if you can look at the New Year maybe as like an invitation to do things differently where you feel like you want to, but you would be best served to make sure you're doing that on your own terms.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, so for a lot of people, there are sort of some consistent goals they'd like to reach, you know, like getting in better shape or running a marathon or, you know, writing a book or something, you know, whatever. There are probably some overlapping ones that people share, but, you know, just making sure that anything you're doing is coming from that genuine place of this is helping me work towards the life that I want to build and the person I want to be, and not this is what everybody else is doing, so I'm going to try to do it too.
Yeah. I'm just thinking like that new year, new you. I mean, that's sort of, we've all been brainwashed to think this, right? Like to see the new year as like turning a new page. It's a fresh start. What a disservice to all of us that's, you know, because every day is an opportunity, right? To
100%
to turn the page, to start fresh. Every month, every week. Like, it's so sad that the new year is like that time to do that stuff, because it should be every day is that time. And so I try not to have the New Year's resolutions, because I have in the past, and I'll stick to them for like a month, and then it's done, right?
Right.
And I'm tired of like setting myself up for that disappointment in myself.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing to acknowledge, to go, every year I set these resolutions and they just don't happen, to be able to go, well, maybe I need to stop banging my head against the wall, and then it's going to stop hurting. You know, and it's interesting, actually. So something Cal Newport has talked about is how he likes to start making changes in like September, because that just works better with our schedules and how like our work schedules tend to operate. So you're coming back. So, you know, you have the summer to maybe do some reflecting, and then September is when you can start actually putting things into practice. So by the time the new year comes around, you've already started making some changes. You get some momentum going.
Yes. Because
this is a really difficult time of year for a lot of us, you know, who have to deal with winter.
Yeah.
So we're all dealing with the impact of the shorter days and feeling more tired and feeling less inspired and just generally just worse about ourselves. And then to then ask people after a holiday to then start making these changes is definitely a big ask. And I think if we could reframe change as something that could happen whenever you're ready, people would be more willing to change and would be less likely to let themselves off the hook for longer than they really should be. Because I think we've all had the experience of like writing off December, just being like, it's like, I'm just going to let everything slide and just like start fresh.
100%.
And like how much pressure, because you're not only trying to establish new and improved habits, you're also trying to recover from the ones that you let slip through the holidays, which is something I've gotten a lot better about over the years. I don't let my good habits go through the holidays. Like, I definitely give myself some more flexibility and some more breathing room. Like, I wouldn't be able to do this kind of review if I didn't. But like I'm still making sure I'm getting up early and I'm going to bed early and I'm eating really well and I'm still doing my exercise. And I find that just maintaining that as like a consistent thing and not letting any particular time of year be an excuse to let those things slide means it's much easier for me to start making changes. And I often do, you know, at different points. And something I'll be talking about in our next episode when we sort of talk about our plans for 2024 is sort of a new strategy I'm going to be trying out, where I'm not going to be trying to make changes all right at the start of the year. They're going to be much more strategic.
Oh, love that.
And spread out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So first of all, I am so guilty of letting December just slide. And I never realized that until you just said that. I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally me. And I'm just like, oh, there's no point trying anything now. Yeah. I'll just wait until the new year. The other thing to keep in mind too, like the problem with waiting, like for the new year to be like this time where you start your new life. It's for a lot of people, you have time off work at that point. And so it's probably a little easier. I mean, unless you have kids, I know the holidays with kids is super, super busy. So it probably doesn't feel like time off. But I think it's probably easier to feel like, yeah, like I can do this. I can start going to the gym 4 days a week and all, because you're making these kind of like plans while you're off work. So, which is, you know, it's setting yourself up for failure, right? Like, the best time I think to kind of establish new habits is when you're actually living your typical routine. And, you know, you're experiencing your typical energy levels, because that's going to be, you know, like, I'm just thinking, like, if I were to start establishing things in September, I'd probably be more likely to stick with it because that's my busy period at work. So I would be careful to only add in things that I can actually manage with the energy that I have at that time. Yeah. So being mindful as well of like, okay, what's the kind of emotional space I'm in and energy space I'm in, and what are the circumstances around that while I'm making these grand plans? Like, am I on a month-long vacation in like somewhere warm and I'm making these like plans to change my life? Because that's likely not going to stick once I get back to reality.
Yeah. Again, it's that trap of making plans for a person you're not going to be. And
yes.
So you might be that person right now, but definitely not once, you know, the rubber meets the road and life returns as usual.
And that's going to be a tricky thing for me because I'm taking an extended leave from work in January. So I'm off for the holiday break, and then I'm not returning until February. And I'm using that month to really like do some soul searching and kind of life overview. And as a result, we'll probably be putting some sort of plan in place, but I'm going to be doing that while I'm not working, which again is not going to be the situation that's going to continue, right? So it's going to be a challenge for me to be realistic about that stuff. So it's going to be a bit of a process. I don't think I'm not going to have that stuff done by next episode for sure.
Yeah, no, and I feel like it's going to be something we might even want to revisit, you know, halfway through the year, just to kind of like give an update, because
that's a good idea.
The planning and reviewing thing is like an ongoing thing. So just with the new year, it is an opportunity that I like to take to sort of plan ahead, and now, you know, to actually look back and really think about the past year. But it is more with the intention of also establishing just a better overall routine for reviewing shorter periods of time and for planning ahead for the next, you know, the next portion of the year or the next week or whatever.
I love that idea of doing, you know, you do your annual plan, and then 6 months later you go back to your annual plan. Does this still make sense? Does this still align with the direction I'm headed? I think that is really smart. And it reminds me a bit of with business planning. You know, people write these lengthy business plans and then they never actually look at it again. And like the business plan shouldn't just be a thing you write and then it's just sedentary. I think the business plan is meant to change and evolve and adapt frequently, right? And I think you can say the same thing with kind of like an annual plan, which is in a way a business plan. It should be a living document, I feel. because
I
things
agree
change.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, what happens if you have your annual plan and like you hit, like you set out some goals or whatever. And what happens if you hit all of those goals by April? Does that mean you're just done for the year? Like, no, you would revisit, you would establish new things.
Yeah.
So, and that works the other way around too, where it's like, if you review the annual plan 6 months and it's like, oh, I haven't hit these goals. Okay, well, do I need to shift something here? Like, oh, yes, you do. Okay, great. Let's do that now.
Yeah.
And then I think when you get to the point where you're reviewing, you're less likely to look back and be like, oh, I dropped the ball.
Yeah, because you'll have seen it coming, the drop happen when
You
it
would-
did, and you'll
right.
be able to make an adjustment from there.
Exactly. You would have adjusted your plan to ensure your success while you still could, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think I agree 1,000% about having a plan being a living, breathing thing. And it has to respond to the information that you're taking in. And so to think maybe about a plan more as a guide, so that you're helping to guide the things that you're doing through the year, but then you're taking, you're making changes where that needs to happen as you now get input. Because sometimes too, especially if you're maybe establishing a new habit, if this is something you haven't done before, you're not rooted in anything. It's not coming from actually having experience. So until you actually have the experience of trying to do the thing you're trying to do, you're really just taking a shot in the dark. And so, yeah, giving yourself like a guess as to what might work is helpful, again, so you're not just like taking action randomly, but you need to have something in place so that as you start getting this new information in, you sort of start to see the results of the action you've been taking. You go, okay, well, this is working, or this isn't working, or this is whatever, and then you make an adjustment. So you don't stick with something. Nobody gets a gold star for sticking with their plan 100%.
yeah.
Because if you're trying to do that, like no plan is going to be perfect. It can't be. Sometimes you get lucky, and as you do, I suspect as you do this more and more and more, you get better at predicting how things work, but ultimately you don't know until you know. And so if you haven't created some kind of a system to address that updated information, you are just going to keep having the plan fall away. You abandon it, and then you try the same thing again. So it's just this horrible cycle of just nothing ever working out if you don't take into account the fact that things change and have something in place, like to deliberately say, okay, now's the time for me to evaluate and make adjustments.
Yeah. And it's just a nicer way to treat ourselves too.
Yeah, for sure.
Like you think like in your typical workplace, it's not like you do like an annual review and that's it. Like usually your manager's checking in with you along the way, right? Like there's at least that's in my case, like there's constant check-ins to see like how you're doing, how is this project going. It's because it's so unfair to just be like, end of the year, okay, we're going to assess you now.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you try to repot a plant and then that's all you do. You're like, Kate, you're in a new pot, good luck, I'll see you in a year. And then it's like you come back and it's dead. You're like, whoa, what happened? It's like, well, you gotta tend to it in between,
right?
Exactly. Water it, and so you can think about that. Doing a plan and doing a review as being something that's a little bit more substantial than just like doing a check-in. But those check-ins are really essential as well. Like you need the bigger thing, and then you need all the little steps along the way.
Right.
So, do you want to talk about any of your wins? Like, can you think of anything that you really felt proud of from this year?
Yeah, oh man, first of all, the year went by so fast, it feels like. And I'm really just proud of getting back into doing shows, because I took during COVID, I took a break from the in-person stuff, and so getting back into that, and I'm particularly proud of doing the New Art Festival in June, because that was I've applied to that show, I think it was 2 or 3 times that I applied and didn't get in. And so it felt like just to get in was such an accomplishment. And it was one of those things where like, I didn't care if I sold anything, because I was there, and it's a big show. And it was a lot of prep, and I made my own frames with my dad's help, with a lot of my dad's help. But it was like the first really big event that I've done. And I did all the work while working, and it was one of the busiest times at my day job as well. So, and I pulled it off. So I feel really, really proud of that. And I think I'm proud of the fact that I'm getting to a place where I do feel more comfortable that things are going to be how they are. Like I'm not beating myself up as much about not being a different person. And I'm really taking the time to try to figure out, like, learn more about myself and figure out how I can structure this so that it works for me, and feeling okay about that. Like feeling okay that, like, it's my journey is going to look different than other people's, and I have different kind of challenges that I have to work through. And so I just, the kind of self-compassion that I've shown myself, I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, so this year I feel like musically was pretty interesting. I didn't improve as much as I thought I would with some of my musicianship goals. I really wanted to improve as a guitar player. That's always, like, that's an ongoing thing. And I really wanted to improve my mixing skills, which didn't really go where I wanted, but I felt like I had big wins with my songwriting. So in February, I did my 3rd RPM challenge, which, for anybody who doesn't know what that is, RPM, I think, stands for Record Production Month, something like that. So the basis of the challenge is that you have to write, record, produce original music in the month of February. This challenge happens every year. And I took on a particularly ambitious challenge where I did 7 songs. I did a 7-song EP, and I think it's some of my best work. I still think about these songs because the month goes by very slowly and also very quickly.
Yeah.
Partly because it's the shortest month of the year as well, but it's just such a rush that it's you almost don't realize what's happening. And so to get to the end of the month and, I have 7 songs I'm really proud of. They're RPM always represents the best of what I'm able to do on my own at any given moment in time. So there are definitely still areas where I know I need to improve. Again, like the mixing quality is not great. It's the best I was able to do with the time I had, but I was really happy with the songs, with how they turned out, with how I really pushed myself as a writer and a producer. And that just felt like such a big win. And I think one of the things I like about RPM is that it happens so early in the year. So I'm sort of like already set up for the rest of the year, having done this very ambitious creative project. And I'm actually doing some stuff with a couple of the songs off that record that won't see the light of day until next year, but I'm super excited about.
Oh, cool.
So it's kind of like this RPM was like the gift that keeps on giving.
Yes. I love projects like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And coming off of it too, I ended up writing another song. It was just part of a songwriting challenge that I also really loved, that I'm also going to be doing something with. So it felt like this string of songwriting wins. And then I started revisiting some of the songs off of my debut album that I hadn't touched in a while and was able to really flesh them out. Sometimes I get to a point where I'm kind of stuck with a song and I know that it needs more, but I don't know where else to take it. And so the best thing for me to usually do is just put it aside and then come back at a later date when I'm, a more developed musician and songwriter and all of that. And it really did wonders for a couple of the songs on the album. Actually, one of them I wasn't even sure I was going to keep. I was kind of, I was flip-flopping on it a little bit. Sometimes I really liked it and sometimes I didn't. I felt like there was potential there, but I hated the bridge and I just didn't know what else to do with it. But I ended up coming back to it and now I'm really happy with it. So I think it is going to make it onto the album. And I had another one that was actually the first song I had written for the album, even before I knew I was going to do the album. It was actually part of my first attempt at RPM, which ended up being a failed challenge, except that I got a song out of it. So that, is something I'm really happy with how that one turned out. It's gone in quite an interesting direction, but I really like it. And then I had a couple of other new songs I wrote for the album too. I have another one I've started, but I don't think I'm ready to finish it yet. I was trying to toss lyrics around on it, and it's just like, I just couldn't get it. I couldn't get the lyrics to fit. So it's another one where I know if I come back to it, I'll be able to find my way. I have a couple other songs like that I do. I know I have to revisit this year because I feel like I'm just at a point now where I think I can get myself out of the place where I'm stuck. But
isn't it interesting? It's interesting how you need the distance from those things sometimes, right? Or when like you're working on something and it's like your skills or whatever aren't quite there yet, but you know they will be eventually. So you have to kind of like put it aside and then revisit it at some point. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, I find that through this project that's been the case because I guess I officially started it in like 2021. So in 2020 is when I did the sort of like fail. They did like, because of COVID, they did an extra RPM in, I think, April or something. And so I kind of did it, but I just wasn't ready. It just wasn't the time. So I got like 5 or 6 song ideas, and you know, there's the one that I liked enough. I did actually finish it. But I didn't really start thinking in terms of making a full album until 2021 after I'd actually done an RPM. And then I wrote a different song. And we've talked about this before, where it was the kind of song that gave me like a glimpse into my songwriting future. Like it's almost like it came from like a future version of me I wasn't yet.
Yeah.
And so it was really exciting to just get it almost felt like that song was just handed to me.
Yeah.
And I was so excited. And so between that one and then the one I'd written before, I'm like, I think this is kind of showing me where I'm going. And so I've been over the last few years just coming back and writing a bunch of songs for it. I think I've got like 7 or 8 now or something. And it's been a really amazing process of just feeling my identity as a songwriter unfold through this process, and sort of see like I got a glimpse of it from that one song, but now I'm seeing it really unfold as I keep going forward and writing stuff. And it's just been such an amazing process, and I'm so eager to get this album out, but I know there's still so much to do before I can. But I'm really making sure to also just enjoy the process, because this is the only time I'm ever going to experience writing the songs for my first full album. So I don't want to blast through this process just because I'm so eager to get to the end. I really want to savor every music block that I schedule to work on this album, because it's been just like one of the greatest joys of my life to just sit and write these songs. So this has been a big year for songwriting for me, even though by the end of the year I think I only wrote maybe 10 new songs. They felt substantial enough that I'm happy with that output.
That's a lot though. Like when you think about the amount of stuff that goes into like songwriting, because I mean you're not just writing the lyrics, you're doing all of the instrumental stuff too, right? So like that's almost a song a month, which seems incredible to me.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it does take me a long time to get through a song. And again, this is why RPM almost feels like a mystery to me, like how I actually get it done.
Oh yeah,
7 songs in 1 month. And it's funny, as I was reading through it, and this is something I'd actually love us to talk about maybe in January before I do my 4th RPM, is just to talk about, you know, monthly challenges and the pros and the cons of them. And it was just funny to read through my journal entries through the month of February. It was just, as you can see me slowly starting to unravel, as I'm just so obsessed working on that was basically all I thought about. And this is the first year I've actually had a journal practice to accompany my RPM project. And yeah, you could just see as it was like really took a toll on me, but I was so happy with what I came out with. And it's always just amazing that I do it. You know, the first RPM I did, I just didn't know if I could. But I did it. And then it's each year it's that same sort of thing. It's the sense of like, I know I can do it because I've done it, but I just don't know if it's going to be any good. And so to come out the other side with stuff I was so proud of and so happy with, and that I felt like I accomplished what I wanted, which was to be pushed as a songwriter and a producer. I was just like, I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. So I love that I stretched myself this year with the songwriting, and that I feel like it's really paying off in the end result of what I'm making.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the monthly challenges, it's not something I have never tried one, and it's because I know I would not stick to it. And so
Uh,
that would be an interesting conversation to have between you and I, because again, like
yeah.
it shows like we approach things very differently. And I just like, yeah, as soon as you tell me like you got to do this in a month, and I haven't come across one yet where I'm like, oh, I would stick to that. Mm-mm.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of thoughts, but yeah, we'll save it for an episode because I would love to invite our listeners to consider, or any of our listeners who are musicians to consider doing RPM with me this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit in the future. And I also had a pretty big year with just personal growth. I actually don't think you and I've talked a lot about stoicism, but I got into it September, October of 2022, but 2023 is when I really started to take it seriously. So I did the New You challenge I did last January was from the Daily Stoic, and I ended up connecting with some really incredible fellow students of Stoicism, and I've been in touch with them through the year. I meet up with them, and it's had a really positive impact on my life and on just helping me, focus on the things that I can control and not worry so much about the things that I can't. It's
Yes.
given me some, just like an overall sense of peace. And I don't know, I feel like I don't want to talk about it too much, but I just want to sort of acknowledge how much of an impact it had, because I'm definitely a better person and better musician because of it, because of how it helped to direct my focus. It's been a big part of why I've become so self-reflective and why I've made a lot of the changes I have, why I've established a lot of the habits that I have. And it's just finding, the power in community, a community of people who are like-minded, who are just striving to be better. Because, the people you surround yourself with can really, either pull you down or can really uplift you. And so connecting with people who are like that has just helped to make me better. I mean, it's the same feeling I get in just talking to you every week, how much better I feel like that's made me as a creative person. And again, you and I wanting to start this podcast is to potentially build this community where we are supportive of each other, and we want to get better, but there's a lot of compassion, and there's a lot of consideration in all of that. So that's really been a big part of my personal development journey, has been finding a concrete philosophy to follow. And I think that's something I was missing for a lot of years, is I had this vague sense of like just wanting to be better, wanting to be a better person, and having something that I could actively return to. So reading, the Stoics and having quotes to reflect on, and doing my journaling, and doing all of that, having actual examples of the kind of person I'm trying to be has really helped, because it's made me stop in the moment and go, am I being the person right now that I want to be?
Right.
And it's, it's improved my interactions with everybody, with my students, with how I even think about my business going forward, and all of that. So, I think all of my success through the year can really be attributed to having this philosophical practice that I just didn't have before.
Oh, it's super cool. That would be an interesting thing to talk about too, is like sort of personal philosophies that have helped us.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah, because I don't really, and I'm aware of Stoicism, and I've looked into it before, and the concepts are definitely like intriguing, but I don't know much about it. So I'd be so curious to hear more about your experience, kind of learning more about it and stuff like that. That's that's neat.
Yeah, I'm happy to share for sure. Yeah, I think as far as, I mean, I had a couple other things I did. Like I started learning Greek this year, but it's been kind of an interesting thing where I've kept up with it, but I know I'm not learning it in the way I know I need to. And some of that comes from just understanding how to learn music the best way possible. I know I'm not really doing what I need to get to a level of like Greek proficiency. And part of that has just been because I've been focusing on other things. I've been doing enough like to keep myself sort of floating along and, seeing like little improvement, because I didn't want to just let it go. Because if I have some kind of a daily habit in place, it's going to be way easier to improve it going forward. So I didn't let it slide. I started in January and I haven't missed a day. But I do know I want to do more going forward with that. But this still felt pretty exciting. I only speak English, so this is the first time I've actively started learning another language, and it's been really interesting to just to have that experience of like having a foreign language now not sound so foreign is pretty cool.
Yeah, neat.
And it gives me a chance to say things to my cat in Greek.
Right.
She doesn't listen to me anyway, so it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter that she doesn't understand Greek. She won't listen to me in English.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts on reviewing and reflecting on the past year?
No, I think any other thoughts that I have, I think I'm going to talk about next time, because specifically as far as the things that I want to improve, I'd also like to establish a plan for how to improve them. So before I talk too much about the things that I really want to work on, I think I have to think about a plan, and then I think it'll tie in better with next week. So I think I'm good. I think overall I had a pretty good year. I also had like one of the hardest years of my life because I had the move to Ottawa that was really stressful, and I lost my dog of almost 16 years.
Yeah.
So that was really difficult, but I feel like ultimately it was a pretty solid year. So I guess I'll wrap up by saying mostly a good year, really hard, but I made it through.
Yeah. And isn't that a win?
That is that's a huge win.
Yep. I think
sure.
that's
I've been giving myself credit for that.
Yeah.
That I dealt with a lot of really hard things in a much better way than I ever would have previously.
Yeah, that's a huge win. And I think anyone who's listening who, if that kind of resonates with you, like pat on your back for making it through a year. Yeah.
What about you? Any last thoughts?
No, other than I don't like the new year because of the new year, new you type thing. And it's like so ingrained in me to like, this is the year I'm going to lose 50 pounds and get in shape. And it's like, I know that's not going to happen. But I look forward to kind of like mid-January when that kind of rhetoric is gone. And
everybody's changes have all fallen off, fallen away, and everybody stops talking about it.
Yeah, and we're back to normal.
Back to normal now?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that's kind of, I like that, yeah.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with a student this week, she's just talking about having a tough year and, but not wanting to make the year, like, not putting these really high expectations on the new year. And I'm like, that's really smart. Because I'm definitely, as much as I'm better about that, I can be guilty of that, of being like, this is the year I do all these things. I'm like, no, more than likely, this year is going to be a lot like just a continuation of the last.
Yeah.
But it just over time, it'll get better if I'm actively participating in improving my life.
Yeah.
Which is ultimately much more interesting to me, I think, than making these big, check mark changes where you're just like, I did this and I did this. I think just learning to cultivate that kind of conversation with your life, I think is going to be so much more rewarding, so that you're not feeling like every year comes, you have to make these changes. You'll just be at a point where you're doing your own thing and you're happy, and you make changes when it's time to make changes, and, sort of let the new year just be the calendar changing.
Yeah. I think a better way, instead of like, not New Year's resolutions, but like what are your promises to yourself? And I think my promise to myself for 2024 is to continue to learn how to be more gentle on myself and less self-critical. And I think that's something I know I can keep because I'm working on it now, and it will serve me well for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to give you an upgrade to that as a potential challenge. If you can get to a point where you're feeling really gentle and compassionate with yourself, I'd love to see you just celebrate yourself more. I think, you're not seeing just how amazing you are, and I'm constantly blown away. And maybe I need to say this more too. One of the things I realized this year is I need to appreciate the things in my life more, and I think I need to tell the people in my life more how great they are.
Oh, so I'm guilty of that too.
I'm constantly in awe of how incredible you are and just the things you do. So, for all of your faults that you're of course noticing because you are you, and we're all, incredibly self-critical, I'd love to see you acknowledge more just like how it just inherently like what a great person and artist you are in all of that, and just sort of celebrate who you are. That might make it also easier for you to just be comfortable being yourself and like building a life for yourself and be like, I'm great. I want to do like these amazing things for myself because I think I deserve it.
Wow. Okay. Well, first of all, back at you. And then also,
thank you.
It's really interesting because as you were saying that, I'm like, okay, so I have some work to do here, because I felt this kind of like repulsion, like this idea of like celebrating you and recognizing how awesome you are. And like, I know my strengths, and I celebrate my strengths, but my weaknesses prevent me from celebrating myself as a whole. You know what I mean? And so like when you say that, I'm like, oh, but I'm like, I know I'm awesome in some areas, but I'm not just awesome. Like that's not possible.
But I think too, our flaws are kind of can be part of what make us great in some ways. Like what make us who we are. Point. And because we if we let our flaws give us a reason to, treat people poorly, like that's one thing. If our flaws are so self-destructive and destructive to our lives and the people around us, that's an issue. But I think we all are going to have areas where we fall short, where we're short-sighted. But if we're constantly acknowledging that and working past that, I mean, it's going to be part of what makes us who we are, that we've overcome these things, or that we're working on these things, or that we recognize that there is a deficiency there, and then you try to accommodate them as best you can. And that, a lot of these things are things we're going to be working on forever. And I think to be somebody who cares about that, you care about, you recognize that you have these flaws and that you care enough to want to make changes, I think it says a lot. It's like nobody's perfect. And sometimes our flaws and our quirks and things, that's part of what makes us who we are and makes us interesting people, and not just like these robots, who are like perfect, because that's not interesting. And it's also just not possible. So if you can kind of almost like embrace some of the things that you're struggling with and go, like that, that's so me, but I'm working on it.
It's also nice too, because in a way, like the struggles that you experience and the difficulties that we face, it also helps us, I think, relate to each other in a way that we wouldn't be able to do if we didn't have those experiences, right? So like there's a connection to be had in our struggles, which I think is important to recognize and celebrate as well. Yeah, I think we connect maybe more through our struggles than we do. I think because for something that comes easily to you, you don't really have to think about it. Yeah. But if it's something you're struggling with, you think about it a lot, and often it's from a place of wanting to find a solution. So to have somebody else struggling and wanting to fix it, not just struggling and sort of just laying there and just being, like giving up, but to see somebody who's like, I'm dealing with this too, and I'm trying some things, and there's something really inspirational about that, but from a place that's really accessible. Yes. So I think looking at somebody who doesn't struggle with something, there's really not much to offer there. But to see somebody who is struggling in the same ways and who has, maybe surpassed that, but who has all this insight, there's definitely something. It would be very hard for us to relate to anybody if there wasn't like that mutual human struggle. Yeah. All right. So next week we're going to be talking about our actual plans for the year. I'm going to be probably picking your brain, and I likely won't have my plan developed, but I am really looking forward to that conversation. All right. Yeah, I feel like my plan's probably not going to be fully developed. Planning is definitely more of my jam, so I feel like I'll be better prepared. But I in light of what we were talking about today, I want it to be something that's living and breathable, so it is going to be changing. But I do want to have something established just to kind of get me set up, to really accomplish the things that I think I can actually accomplish over the next year. Yeah, and I'd like to invite anybody listening to send along questions or comments. Maybe you want to let us know how your year went. You can send us an email to streamofartpodcast@gmail.com. Maybe if we get people sending messages, we'll eventually start a mailbag kind of thing. That would be really fun. That would be fun. Yeah, and just if any of you have pets, please send pictures of pets. Yes. I'd love to just see. I can't remember where I picked this up from, but somebody used to get
used to get people to send them pictures of their pets.
Oh, I love that.
I'm sure a few people do this. If you have any cute pets, please send pictures.
Yes.
Just so that we have something nice in our inbox. But questions and comments, again, are welcome. We'd like to really build up an open conversation with people. So feel free to pipe in and, add your 2 cents and again, ask some questions, and we might just be able to eventually start some kind of a part of our episode where we do questions and comments. Maybe we can do some Q&A episodes. I think that'd be really fun. So
that would be. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening, and enjoy your holidays. I think this episode will be coming out after Christmas, but whatever you're doing during this time, I hope it's good. And we will see you in the next episode.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.